Beneath the surface of a forgotten sea, where coral gardens bloom over steel bones and time drips like salt through the gills of memory, lies a silence deeper than war. Here, in the heart of the Pacific, the waters cradle secrets rusted by decades, hushed by silt, and veiled in the stillness of a sunken grave. This is Chuuk Lagoon, once Chuuk Lagoon, a remote constellation of islands in Micronesia, where tropical winds once carried the scent of breadfruit and warships. Where atolls, as ancient as the ocean's breath, encircle a lagoon that was both a stronghold and a tomb. Here, wreckage dreams beneath the waves. Japanese cruisers, merchant vessels, submarines, and Zero fighters now sleep beneath coral blankets. Frozen in time, yet dissolving grain by grain. But this story does not begin with wreckage. It begins with stillness. With islanders who fished by moonlight. With warriors who carved stories into breadfruit trees. With oceans that knew only stars and tides before they knew steel and fire. Let us begin at the edge of time, before engines, before conquest, when Chuuk was not yet a name in military history, but a sacred heart in the chest of the sea. Long before the thunder of engines echoed across the Pacific, before steel hulls cut through blue waters and propellers stirred up sediment from coral beds, there was only the ocean, vast, patient, and breathing in rhythm with the stars. In this watery world, the lagoon that would come to be called Chuuk lay cradled like a jewel in the hands of time. Sheltered by a great ring of barrier reef and scattered with volcanic islands cloaked in mist and breadfruit trees, Chuuk was once a kingdom without a crown, a constellation of small lives governed not by empires, but by the sea. The people of Chuuk, Micronesian in origin, were navigators of astonishing grace and intuition. They read the swells of the sea like an elder's face, noting every wrinkle, every whisper of wind. Long before compasses arrived in their harbors, they knew how to voyage by the stars, by the glimmering constellations that wheeled silently above their outrigger canoes. Theirs was a world made of rhythm, of tides and chants, of fish and woven mats, of stone altars set among jungle vines. Daily life in Chuuk was both simple and profound. Communities were organized along familial lines, governed by clan structures that balanced leadership with shared responsibility. Breadfruit was harvested with reverence, taro cultivated in wet fields carved into volcanic slopes, and coconuts gathered like offerings. Fishing was more than sustenance, it was ceremony. The sea was not merely a provider, but a being, a spirit that listened. Stories tell of dolphins that guided canoes and storms that arrived only when disrespected. Religion, though unwritten, breathed through everything. Spirits dwelled in the banyan trees, in the limestone caves, in the waves that struck the reef, in even rhythms. Offerings were made not to gods distant and aloof, but to ancestors who lingered close, to those who watched from the shadows of the breadfruit groves and whose laughter was sometimes heard on the wind. They left little behind in the way of ruins. No towering ziggurats, no marble temples. Instead, their legacy was carved in canoes, in tattoos, in oral histories passed like sacred relics from grandfather to grandson, from mother to daughter. What they built was impermanent by design, like the tides they followed, meant to move, to shift, to flow. Then came the first whispers from beyond the horizon. Ships with sails like clouds. Break time equals 0. 25s, / tongues that twisted the wind into strange syllables. In the 16th century, Spanish explorers reached Micronesia, casting European eyes onto this blue world. They left crosses, names, and diseases in their wake, though they never claimed Chuuk as they did other islands. It would not be until centuries later, under German and then Japanese control, that the transformation would begin in earnest. By the late 19th century, the winds had shifted. Germany annexed the Caroline Islands, including Chuuk, in 1899. They brought flags and contracts, but few lasting changes to island life. It was in 1914, when Japan seized the islands during the opening days of World War I, that a deeper current began to stir. Under the Japanese South Seas Mandate, Chuuk, then called Truk, was reshaped. Roads were carved where footpaths once ran. Schools taught in Japanese. Missionaries replaced local beliefs with foreign scripture. And quietly, beneath the surface, the lagoon was chosen for a destiny it did not ask for. Its central location, deep harbor, and natural defenses made it an ideal military port. By the 1930s, as tensions mounted across the globe, the Empire of Japan began fortifying Truk with increasing urgency. Docks were expanded. Airfields were carved from jungle. Fuel tanks were buried in the volcanic soil. War had not yet come, but the lagoon could already hear it breathing. Still, for the islanders, life endured as it always had, woven between ocean and reef, between myth and labor. Children fished from coral ledges. Women beat breadfruit into paste and sang lullabies to the tides. But even as daily rhythms persisted, a quiet unease crept in. The lagoon was no longer their own. Giant ships had begun to line the horizon. Airplanes growled above the palms. Something vast and unknowable had begun to stir beneath the calm. It is often said that the sea remembers. That long after empires fall and flags fade, the water holds the truth. And in the glassy blue heart of Chuuk, the sea was preparing to remember much. Steel and fire. Oil and bone. Names that would one day be spoken in diving masks, whispered through regulators, etched in barnacles and coral polyps. But in this chapter, before the fire, there was still time. Still space for memory. Still islands cradled in the hands of ancestors. Still a lagoon whose depths held only fish and silence. Soon, the sky would darken. Soon, the ships would come. But not yet. Not yet. It began slowly, quiet construction humming beneath the palms, supplies arriving under the guise of civilian commerce, and concrete poured beneath the illusion of peace. By the time the world noticed, Chuuk Lagoon had already transformed. What was once a quiet cluster of islands surrounded by coral and cloud became the beating heart of the Japanese Empire's Pacific ambitions. The Japanese called it Tone, the Southern Ocean Territories. It was more than geography. It was strategy etched into ocean currents. Chuuk, renamed Truk by foreign tongues, offered everything an empire could desire. A lagoon deep enough to hide an armada. A barrier reef broad enough to shield from submarine eyes. A location central to the Pacific, within striking distance of New Guinea, the Philippines, the Marshalls, and even Hawaii. In the 1930s, as Japan's presence in the region expanded, so did its sense of inevitability. Treaty limits were ignored. Maps were redrawn. And Chuuk Lagoon, quietly and methodically, was turned into the Gibraltar of the Pacific. Japanese engineers, many of them from the Imperial Navy, arrived with blueprints and resolve. Runways were scraped from island hillsides. Underground bunkers were carved into volcanic rock. Fuel depots, torpedo storage, radio command posts, ammunition stockpiles, these began to rise, hidden by foliage and camouflage nets. Every atoll and islet became part of a network, a chessboard of strategic intent. Dustbound Island, the largest in the lagoon, became the administrative center. Here, a massive communications hub was installed. Concrete buildings with slotted windows rose from the earth like the teeth of some sleeping giant. Japanese soldiers drilled in the early morning mist, their boots marking time on soil that once knew only bare feet and rain. Pfeffin, Tanoas, Eaton, each island took on a new role. Radar stations blinked under palm leaves. Anti-aircraft guns were mounted behind hand-chiseled embrasures. Concrete airstrips stretched like scars across once sacred ground. Beneath the surface, preparations grew darker. A vast underwater anchorage was mapped out in the lagoon's depths. Submarines began to arrive in greater numbers. Oil tankers offloaded fuel that was hidden deep in the jungle. By 1942, the Imperial Japanese Navy's combined fleet had stationed its most vital assets here. Carriers, cruisers, destroyers, and submarines all floated within the calm waters of Chuuk, their gray hulls mirrored in blue. The local islanders, Chuuk's men, women, and children, watched their world change. Some were recruited as laborers. Others were displaced from ancestral homes. Japanese schools taught new alphabets. Old traditions were suppressed. The spiritual balance that once defined the lagoon's islands began to shift beneath the weight of military obsession. Yet, to the Japanese command, Chuuk was paradise, disciplined, efficient, impenetrable. Its beauty was seen not as nature's poetry, but as camouflage. From the air, enemy reconnaissance would see only scattered trees and turquoise waters, unaware of the ships hidden beneath overhanging cliffs and inland jungle bays. By mid-1942, Chuuk was the nerve center of Japanese Pacific operations. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto himself used it as a base. Radio messages pulsed out like silent orders to the ends of the Pacific. It was from here that the planning for Pearl Harbor had once been relayed. And it was from here that Japan hoped to extend its hold over the Pacific indefinitely. But fortress though it was, Chuuk had a weakness, a terrible, inescapable truth written into the very blueprint of empire, the illusion of permanence. No matter how strong the walls, no matter how deep the harbor or how secret the passages, war finds its way in. Empires are not built to last, they are built to consume. The Americans knew this. As they fought island by island across the Pacific, their eyes turned to Chuuk. Not merely as a target, but as a symbol. If Chuuk could fall, so too could the myth of Japanese invincibility in the Pacific. And so they began to watch, to map, to wait. The waters of the lagoon, once mirrors to stars and sails, now had destroyers and death. The islands, once pathways for barefoot children and ancestral spirits, now trembled beneath the weight of fuel drums, munitions crates, and steel. Chuuk had become a fortress. But a fortress can also become a tomb. The tide was rising. The sky would darken. And from far across the Pacific, the thunder of wings had begun. At dawn, it began, not with trumpets, nor with words, but with shadows. They came in formation, waves of steel-winged fury slicing through the upper skies, each engine a harbinger of what was to come. The tranquility of Chuuk Lagoon shattered under the weight of history. On February 17, 1944, the heavens themselves opened. Operation Hailstone, the code name whispered in command rooms across the Pacific, was no mere assault. It was a calculated storm, a symphony of destruction composed by Admiral Raymond Spruance and executed with surgical precision by Task Force 58. The lagoon, once a secret sanctuary of the Japanese Empire, was now encircled. Above, 500 American aircraft rained vengeance. Below, the stillness of the deep waited to claim what war would cast down. Chuuk had long been the nerve center of Japan's Pacific operations, a fortress believed to be impenetrable. But the Americans had watched, waited, and now struck with overwhelming force. Their target, not just ships, but the myth of Japanese invincibility itself. From carriers like the USS Enterprise, Yorktown, and Essex, squadrons of Hellcats, Avengers, and dauntless dive bombers screamed across the early morning light. Their bombs fell in rhythms, a dark, deafening rain. At first, the defenders of Chuuk were caught off guard. Anti-aircraft fire lit the air in desperation, tracer rounds arcing upward like the flailing limbs of a drowning giant. But it was too late. One by one, ships burst into flame. The Ikoku Maru, a former passenger liner repurposed into an armed transport, took a direct hit to her ammunition hold. In a flash, she was consumed by fire and disintegrated, her remains raining down over the lagoon. The San Francisco Maru, loaded with fuel and torpedoes, erupted in a ball of light and black smoke that twisted upward like a broken prayer. Japanese cruisers tried to flee, but the reef-lined passages offered no escape. The Katori, flagship of Rear Admiral Aratamo Goto, was cornered by aircraft and destroyers alike. She fought valiantly, firing broadside after broadside, But in the end she too succumbed, her bow splitting the sea as she sank into silence. Along the islands, airstrips were turned to craters. Warehouses exploded like thunderclaps. Fuel depots sent columns of smoke spiraling to heaven. The defenders, caught between duty and hopelessness, could do little but resist and die. For 2 full days, the sky never stopped roaring. The lagoon's waters boiled beneath the falling debris. The sea, once a mirror of the sun, became a graveyard of twisted iron. When it ended on February 18th, the silence felt unnatural. More than 40 ships had been sunk. Over 200 aircraft destroyed. Thousands of Japanese sailors and soldiers were lost. Many still entombed in the wrecks below. The Americans did not land. There was no invasion. Their mission was simple: annihilation. To cripple Japan's Pacific Fleet before it could regroup. And in that, Operation Hailstone succeeded beyond expectation. But beneath the tactical victory lay something deeper. The lagoon had changed. Where once coral gardens stretched beneath translucent waves, now rested rusting hulls and broken wings. Fish darted through bullet-riddled fuselages. Seaweed tangled through artillery barrels. The sea had accepted the war's dead and made them part of its endless memory. To the Chuukese, the islanders whose lands bore the scars of a conflict not their own, the end of the attack did not bring relief. The occupiers remained, but their empire was bleeding. Hunger, illness, and despair crept in like shadows. Above, the birds returned. Below, the lagoon darkened. And the wreckage settled into its resting place, not as ruins, but as monuments, silent, solemn, suspended in time. Operation Hailstone had come and gone. But its echo would never truly fade. Not in these waters. Not in this world of ghosts and coral. In the days after the firestorm faded, silence returned to Chuuk Lagoon, but it was a silence thick with smoke and salt, with memory and mourning. The sea, that eternal witness, had absorbed the violence and now began its slow work of burial. Where once ships floated proud and bristling with steel, now only their shadows remained, descending like broken angels into the deep. The surface of the water sparkled again in sunlight, deceptively serene. But beneath, a forest of metal had bloomed. Hulls torn open by torpedoes yawned like open mouths. Decks once busy with sailors now slanted in eerie quiet, littered with the detritus of war: boots, helmets, shattered cranes, twisted cables. Some ships sank fast, as if eager to escape the flames. Others lingered in their agony, listing and groaning as they bled oil across the lagoon. The Fujikawa Maru, once a merchant ship, had carried airplanes in her cargo hold. Now, her wreck sits upright beneath the waves, her internal skeleton exposed like the bones of a leviathan, still cradling Zero fighters in her belly. Down in the silence, no national anthem plays. No commanders bark orders. There is only the slow colonization of ruin by reef. Coral fingers creep along gun barrels. Anemones bloom where officers once stood. Sea fans wave softly over rusted torpedoes still sleeping in their racks. Nature wastes nothing. The sea does not choose sides. In time, even weapons become shelter, even destruction becomes home. Fish weave between beams and broken cranes. Moray eels nest where command posts once glowed with maps and strategy. Some of the dead were never found. Trapped in engine rooms, sealed in flooded corridors, they vanished into the deep. Their bones dissolved into the very chemistry of the water. Their spirits linger, it is said, in the hulls, especially in the wrecks that still hold human remains, untouched and unreachable. Divers who explore these sunken graveyards speak of an eerie stillness, a weight heavier than pressure. Inside some ships, the air seems to hum with memory. Teacups rest on shelves. Ink brushes remain beside logs that will never be finished. Tools lie where hands dropped them. It is as if time chose not to flee, but to sink along with the men and machines. The Shinkaku Maru, a tanker turned auxiliary warship, lies on her port side now, swathed in soft green light. Her bridge is still intact. Her radio room still bears the bones of circuits. Nearby, the Hoki Maru, once a New Zealand freighter, captured and repurposed, rests with her cargo of trucks and tanks now entombed in algae and barnacles. There is a reverence required here. Chuuk Lagoon is not merely a dive site. It is a submerged battlefield, a museum without walls, a tomb where the past breathes quietly through shifting currents. To descend into these waters is to enter a sanctum of the 20th century's most harrowing moments. What was Operation Hailstone to the sailors who vanished beneath the waves? To the Chuukese who watched fire rain from the sky? To the families in Japan who waited for ships that would never return? It was not merely strategy, it was transformation. It was the instant when time split, before the storm and after. And now, decades later, that moment is still there, suspended in salt. The sea preserves with patience. It does not judge, but it does not forget. War may be a storm, but the sea is eternity. And in the depths of Chuuk Lagoon, the storm has not ended. It has only changed form. There, beneath the calm blue waves, lie steel coffins filled with silence. They do not rise. They do not speak. They only wait. Above the wrecks and ruin resting on the ocean floor, life on the islands of Chuuk stirred again, slower, quieter, like breath returning to a body long submerged. The thunder of bombs had stopped, but their echo clung to the palms and breadfruit trees. For the Chuukese, the people of these ancient isles, the war had left behind a silence heavier than sound. They had not chosen the war. They had not drawn the borders or signed the treaties. Yet their homeland had been transformed into a fortress, their harbors packed with iron leviathans, their forests carved by airstrips and bunkers. The Japanese Empire, ruling Micronesia under a League of Nations mandate since the 1920s, had fortified Chuuk as its Pacific bastion, its Gibraltar of the East. The islanders had watched this build-up with cautious eyes. Soldiers came. Guns came. Ships came. And then, fire came. When the skies turned black during Operation Hailstone, the Chuukese did not run to battle stations. They ran to the hills. Into caves and thick forests they fled, clutching children and elders, food and fear. Smoke from bombed fuel tanks rolled through coconut groves like ghosts. The roar of exploding ships became part of the wind. The war was everywhere. And when it ended, what remained was ruin in them. The Japanese soldiers who had once strutted in boots now limped through hunger. Cut off from supply lines, starving and demoralized, many turned to the islanders for survival. The roles shifted. The soldiers had once commanded. Now they begged for yams and fish. Some were remembered for their cruelty. Others, for kindness shared in the darkness. Food grew scarce. Medicine was a memory. Fields were burned or abandoned. Traditional life, already strained under decades of colonial rule, now contorted beneath the weight of war's aftermath. Yet, the Chuukese endured. They fished in waters glowing with spilled fuel. They sang old songs at night to chase away the new ghosts. In the ruins of foreign empires, they rebuilt what was theirs. Time and Chuuk began to move differently. The war had cracked open history. Before the bombs, and after them. Generations born in peace now grew up playing beside rusted tanks and sunken barges. Children swam above the skeletons of warplanes without knowing what they once meant. Stories filled the space between memory and silence. Some elders told of spirits wandering the jungle, speaking Japanese or whispering through radios that no longer worked. Others swore the lagoon glowed on moonless nights, not with bioluminescence, but with the sorrow of the drowned. American forces returned, not as enemies, but as occupiers. After Japan's surrender in 1945, Micronesia passed under United States administration. A new flag flew, but the old wounds remained. Concrete bunkers were left to decay. The sunken fleet was declared off-limits, until, decades later, curious divers began to descend. Break time equals 0. 25s/. The Chuukese watched as the world began to rediscover what they had never forgotten. Foreigners came, not with weapons, but with cameras and oxygen tanks. The wrecks became relics. History, long buried in salt and silt, surfaced again in photographs and documentaries. And so began a complicated relationship, with memory, with the sea, with the global gaze. For the Chuukese, the wrecks were not just artifacts or attractions. They were tombs. They were markers of trauma, but also resilience. A source of sorrow, but also of identity. Many wrecks lie within eyesight of the shore. From the beaches, you can see the outlines beneath the turquoise water, hulks of steel frozen in descent. They are always there, waiting. In schools, the younger generation learns of world wars through stories passed down, not from textbooks, but from grandparents. They learn that their islands were once at the center of an empire's downfall, that the sea around them holds not just fish, but history. As the world moved on, Chuuk remained tethered to its past by anchor and reef. Tourists came. Documentarians came. Marine archaeologists came, all seeking the Ghost Fleet. But few asked how the living coexisted with the dead. There is a humility in the Chuukese spirit, shaped by ocean and storm, by colonialism and survival. They do not speak loudly of the war, but they live beside it every day, planting gardens near rusting airstrips, fishing where gunboats sleep, singing lullabies over waters that once screamed. And perhaps there is a wisdom in this quiet coexistence. A lesson not of forgetting, but of enduring. Of living among ghosts without fear. Of making peace, not with war, but with the memory of it. For in Chuuk, the past is not distant. It is tied in coral. It is iron in silence. It is present in every wave that laps against a sunken deck. In every child who swims above a steel tomb. In every eye that watches the horizon and remembers when the sky burned. Below the blue veil of Chuuk Lagoon, where sunlight filters in golden shafts and the silence is ancient and soft, something extraordinary unfolds. The war machines that once brought destruction have become the scaffolding of life. The ocean, indifferent to human sorrow, has begun her slow reclamation. Steel, oil, fire, now dressed in coral and algae, wrapped in the tendrils of sea anemones and home to darting schools of color. The Ghost Fleet of Chuuk, as it is now called, is no longer merely a graveyard. It is a garden, strange, sunken, and teeming. Over the years, the warm, sheltered waters of the lagoon have transformed these relics of war into thriving artificial reefs. Iron hulls, once built to repel life and resist decay, now host a microcosm of marine biodiversity. Fusiliers shimmer like mercury through rusted hatches. Sea turtles glide past twisted gun turrets where barnacles bloom like blossoms. Lionfish float in the shadow of a sunken Zero fighter, as if standing eternal guard. Giant clams have nestled in elevator shafts, and ghostly soft corals wave from shattered periscopes. The ecosystem, once disrupted by battle, has stitched itself around the wreckage. Predator and prey, plant and plankton, swirl through cabins filled with silt and memory. Scientists who dive here speak of the unique synergy, how the reef has colonized the metallic bones of war, how nature reweaves even the ugliest of pasts into something astonishingly alive. But this beauty is haunted. The wrecks are not merely scenery. They are tombs. Many Japanese sailors went down with their ships. Bodies that were once flesh are now memory, scattered among mossy helmets, bone-white sake bottles, rusted bayonets still strapped to belts. Inside some holds, porcelain bowls lie where mess halls once stood. Gas masks rest beside unopened crates of ammunition. War lives here, in stillness. Divers descend with reverence. It is not a playground. It is a cathedral beneath the sea, its stained glass replaced by coral fans and shafts of sunlight. Every fin stroke stirs the past. Every exhale, a reminder that one is a visitor among ghosts. Nature does not erase. She absorbs. She does not forget. She embraces. Slowly, patiently, she reshapes what man has broken. A battleship becomes a coral shelf. A torpedo tube becomes a nursery for shrimp. Even spilled oil, once a death sentence, has been licked clean by time and tide. Yet, the clock is ticking. The wrecks, though preserved by the lagoon's calm conditions, are not immune to decay. Salt gnaws at steel. Corrosion creeps through bulkheads. Some ships are collapsing inward, their decks buckling under time's pressure. And beneath many lie bombs and fuel tanks, still sealed, sleeping, but not dead. Environmentalists warn that these ticking time bombs, relics of human fury, could one day rupture. A single leak from a rusted oil tank could poison the very ecosystem that has grown upon it. Efforts to assess, stabilize, or safely remove the oil are slow, expensive, and fraught with risk. The Ghost Fleet is both marvel and menace. Still, the fish come. The coral spreads. New species arrive. From destruction, diversity. From silence, song. The reef sings in color and motion, in a language older than words. It is a paradox, this fusion of life and death. An accidental monument where the machinery of war, meant to conquer and end life, now hosts thousands of creatures that thrive precisely because of it. The lagoon has made peace in its own way. Not by erasing the scars, but by turning them into shelter. It teaches, wordlessly, that even the ugliest things can become part of a living whole. That death, given time, becomes soil for life to grow. And so the Ghost Fleet slumbers, half in shadow, half in light. Its story told in rust and reef, in silent chambers where bullets sleep beside starfish. A reminder that history never truly sinks. It transforms. They come in silence, cloaked not in armor but in neoprene and glass, bearing no weapons, only breath and reverence. From every corner of the world, they descend into the still waters of Chuuk Lagoon, divers, explorers, seekers of stories. With each careful kick of their fins, they slip through time, falling gently into a realm where history has drowned but not vanished. This is no ordinary dive site. It is a pilgrimage. For some, it is adventure, an encounter with the rare, the forbidden, the once forgotten. For others, it is an act of mourning, a return to the past, searching for closure among iron bones and salt-preserved memories. Here, the ocean does not merely conceal. It reveals. The journey begins long before the plunge. Divers fly into Winnow, the capital of Chuuk State, where humid air greets them like breath from the jungle. Dive shops line the shore, staffed by those who know these wrecks intimately. They offer briefings not only of depth and tide, but of history, what ship you will see, what fate befell her, what spirits may linger in her hold. Then the boat glides over tranquil waters, rippling with reflected clouds. Somewhere below, beneath this deceptive calm, lies the chaos of a war once fought with fury. Divers check gauges and gear, then slip silently into the sea, vanishing like stones through glass. And suddenly, it surrounds you. The silence. The cold touch of time. The moment your body becomes weightless and the world above fades into blue haze, you understand this is sacred space. The first thing many divers describe is the light, how it diffuses through the lagoon, soft and green, turning every object ghostly, like relics in a dream. They explore freighters and tankers, warships and patrol boats. Inside the Fujikawa Maru, they find a cavernous cargo hold where fighter planes once destined for battle now rest like fallen birds, wings folded under coral dust. In the Shinkaku Maru, a former oil tanker, soft corals have bloomed along the medical bay, growing from surgical trays where life and death once mingled. Diving the San Francisco Maru, known grimly as the $1 million wreck, they swim past tanks and trucks preserved as if in amber. Depth charges still sit in their racks. Bombs, silent and sealed, nestling among shoals of glittering fish. Here, wonder coexists with warning. And deeper still, there are stories not of machines, but of men. In tight cabins, divers find boots by the bed frame, ink bottles, gas masks with lenses turned milk white. Some feel a presence, a heaviness. Others leave small offerings, origami cranes, coins, even handwritten notes sealed in waterproof jars. Not all come to admire. Some come to remember. Families of Japanese soldiers make the journey, knowing their ancestors vanished here without funeral or stone. For them, the wrecks are not adventure, but shrine. To see the metal that entombed their fathers and brothers is to feel the war's echo, not from a textbook, but from the deep. Divers have recorded the names of ships, the cargo they carried, the lives they claimed. Some volunteer with heritage teams to map the sites, photograph damage, or report on leaking oil. In doing so, they become archivists of the sea, part historian, part caretaker. But even the most careful diver knows this is a fragile domain. Every touch can dislodge sediment. Every breath of air bubbles upward, disturbing life and memory. The best dives are quiet ones, observing without intruding, bearing witness without leaving a mark. There are stories of those who dove too deep or too greedily, seeking souvenirs instead of reverence. Some returned with artifacts, only to be plagued by accidents or illness. Superstition or karma, no one can say. But in Chuuk, many believe the spirits of the drowned do not take kindly to theft. Break time equals 0. 25s /. So most divers leave only bubbles. They return to the surface changed. More silent. More humbled. To have floated through history's wreckage is to realize the weight of peace. That the sea keeps what we cannot hold. That memory, when submerged, becomes sacred. They climb back aboard the boat, water trailing from their suits like shadows. Some sit quietly, staring across the lagoon, the sun warming their backs, but not melting the chill they carry within. Others write down what they saw, trying to pin the fluid world of the deep onto paper. None forget. These diverse, pilgrims of the deep, are guardians of a chapter too sacred to close. They bring back not treasure, but understanding. That beneath every quiet sea, there may lie a battlefield. That history does not always rest on land. And that to remember, truly, sometimes one must go beneath the waves. Long before Chuuk Lagoon became a graveyard of iron and oil, it was a jewel in the rising crown of the Japanese Empire. Not by conquest of war, but by the inheritance of empire, when the world was being carved anew after World War I, and Germany's colonial reach was torn apart. In the ashes of that old order, Japan emerged with new domains. The islands of Micronesia, once German protectorates, became Japanese mandates under the League of Nations. By the early 1920s, Japan had turned its gaze toward the scattered isles of the Pacific with quiet but determined purpose. While Western powers watched the Pacific from afar, Japan set foot upon it. In the heart of the Caroline Islands, Chuuk Lagoon, then known as Truk, was transformed from a sleepy archipelago of fishermen and coral atolls into the centerpiece of a grand imperial strategy. It began innocuously enough, harbors dredged, piers constructed, simple warehouses rising from the shoreline. But behind these signs of commercial progress was a subtler intent. Japanese engineers and military planners knew what many did not. Truk's lagoon, with its wide protective reef, deep anchorage, and central location, was perfect for war. An unsinkable fortress in the middle of the Pacific. Throughout the 1930s, while the world's eyes remained on Europe's crises, Japan was fortifying Truk in secret. Concrete bunkers were buried into jungle hillsides. Tunnels were carved through volcanic rock to store munitions and fuel. Airstrips were laid like scars across the islands. Naval bases, radar stations, submarine pens, they all appeared beneath the camouflage of palm fronds and coastal mist. To outsiders, Truk still looked like paradise. But behind the curtain of clouds, it had become the beating heart of Japan's South Seas empire. Thousands of troops were stationed there. Massive stores of fuel, torpedoes, and aircraft parts filled the caves. A vast armada of supply ships, freighters, and warships passed through its waters like clockwork. Some called it the Gibraltar of the Pacific. Others simply called it invincible. Yet the ambitions that built Chuuk's stronghold came not only from military minds. Break time equals 0. 25s Japan's imperial ideology, the dream of a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, rested on cultural as much as military expansion. Japanese settlers were encouraged to come to Micronesia. Schools were opened, teaching Japanese language and values. Shinto shrines rose alongside Catholic churches. Local leaders were co-opted, local customs reshaped. To many Micronesians, the shift was gradual, almost silent. Roads improved. Rice became common. Radios crackled with Tokyo's voice. But beneath this surface of modernization, there was an unease, an awareness that the island now served purposes far beyond its shores. Chuuk had ceased to be simply Chuuk. It had become a cog in the vast machine of empire. When war broke out in the Pacific, Chuuk was ready. From 1941 onward, it became the launchpad for Japanese expansion into the Solomon Islands, New Guinea, and beyond. Battleships refueled in its lagoon. Zero fighters roared down its runways. Generals and admirals walked its corridors with maps and confidence. From Chuuk, the empire reached outward like a rising tide. But ambition always casts a long shadow. The very centrality that made Chuuk valuable also made it vulnerable. American reconnaissance flights began to notice the buildup. Submarines lingered at its edge. Allied strategists realized, to cut out the empire's heart, you must bleed it from the inside. By 1944, the fortress of Chuuk, so carefully built, so secretly armed, would face the storm it had long prepared for. But for now, in this chapter of ascent, the lagoon shimmered with promise. The empire stood high, its reach wide, and the shadow it cast across the Pacific had only begun to deepen. In the hush of pre-dawn stillness on February 17, 1944, the waters of Chuuk Lagoon lay like polished obsidian beneath a moonless sky. Tropical winds whispered through the palms. The island slumbered under a veil of deceptive calm, unaware that above the horizon, death was descending in waves of steel and thunder. For months, the American war machine had watched. They mapped the reefs. They traced the outlines of gun emplacements hidden in jungle shadows. Submarines stalked the anchorage, silently taking measure of Japan's greatest forward stronghold. Chuuk, then known to American commanders as Chuuk, had become a symbol of imperial power. And now, it would become a target. Codenamed Operation Hailstone, the assault was designed not merely as a battle, but as an erasure. Over 500 American aircraft, launched from a dozen carriers, streaked across the sky like the sudden wrath of forgotten gods. From the USS Enterprise, the USS Yorktown, and others, the bombers rose in coordinated flocks, engines droning in mechanical unison. Fighters, dive bombers, torpedo planes, each with a task, each with a mark. The first bombs fell before the sun had risen. Oil depots erupted in black blossoms. Ammunition stores ignited in fiery chains. Break time equals 0. 25s ships at anchor, startled and helpless, became pyres upon the sea. The Ikoku Maru exploded in a flash so bright it seared retinas through clouds. The battleship Nagano, unready and unmanned, was torn open like paper. Japanese anti-aircraft guns barked back with defiance. Tracers lit the sky with desperate streaks of orange. But the swarms kept coming, relentless as tide and storm. At airstrips, Zero fighters tried to rise. Some never made it off the ground, strafed into flame on the runways. Hangars collapsed. Bunkers shook. Jungle canopies were shredded into ash. Across 2 days, the sky never cleared. Day and night blurred under the glow of burning oil and the scream of engines. American planes returned in cycles, rearming, refueling, and rising again. More than 40 ships would be sunk. Hundreds of aircraft destroyed. The lagoon was transformed, no longer a naval base, but a cemetery. Beneath the surface, the ships settled into death. The Fujikawa Maru, her deck still stacked with Zero fighters, groaned as she slipped beneath the waves. The Shinkaku Maru followed, her hospital flags of no protection against the logic of total war. Cranes, crane ships, freighters, tankers, they all vanished, sinking like wounded leviathans to the ocean floor. For the people of Chuuk, the bombardment was a fury without precedent. Civilians fled into caves, into the hills, into the narrow arteries of jungle paths. Some took shelter in dugouts with Japanese soldiers. Others watched in stunned silence from shorelines as their island was consumed by thunder. In the villages, fire rained not from gods, but from machines. And yet, in the chaos, time slowed. The moments became clear as glass, the silence before a bomb's fall, the whine of metal under strain, the deep roar of water swallowing fire. In these suspended seconds, lives were changed, ended, or carried forward into uncertain dawns. When the Americans withdrew on February 18th, they left behind a silence more profound than before. The great stronghold of Chuuk was no longer a fortress. It was a tomb. Cut off from reinforcements, abandoned as a strategic point, it would languish in isolation for the rest of the war. Japanese soldiers would remain, slowly starving, slowly fading. And below them, the fleet slept. Operation Hailstone was one of the most decisive naval air assaults of the Pacific War. Not merely for its destruction, but for what it symbolized, the turning of the tide. It marked the end of Japanese offensive dominance. It announced to the world that the seas were no longer theirs. From now on, the empire would shrink, not grow. And in the depths of the lagoon, time stood still. The ships, once instruments of empire, now lay in peace. Coral would begin to grow on twisted steel. Fish would dart through open cargo holds. The ghost would settle. As we remember this chapter, not just of war, but of legacy, we must listen to the silence left behind. It speaks not only of victory or defeat, but of the deep costs of ambition and the oceans that remember everything. Beneath the serene surface of Chuuk Lagoon, where sunlight dances in ribbons through sapphire depths, lie the silent hulks of war, dozens of ships frozen in their final descent. They rest not as wreckage, but as monuments, massive relics preserved in the cold stillness of salt and time. Steel once forged for dominance now cradles coral gardens. These rusted giants form a sunken cathedral, where silence is prayer and memory is sediment. Each vessel tells its own story, held in the bones of twisted metal and the whisper of currents weaving through shattered hulls. The Fujikawa Maru, perhaps the lagoon's most iconic wreck, lies on her port side, cloaked in marine life. Her forward hold still houses Mitsubishi Zero fighters, their wings folded, their propellers intact, an underwater hangar untouched by time. Ghosts of aviation suspended in blue twilight. Swim deeper, and you find the Shinkaku Maru, a former hospital ship turned cargo vessel. She now rests upright, draped in soft corals and fans that pulse with ocean breath. Her bridge is still navigable, her surgical tools scattered like forgotten instruments of mercy. Sea turtles glide through her passageways. Reef fish nest in her shattered engine room. The Heian Maru, once a passenger liner converted into a submarine tender, lies on her starboard side. In her holds, torpedoes rest like dormant serpents. Type 95 and Type 89 torpedoes, deadly, sleek, and unused, now serve as foundations for sponge and anemone. Through cracked hatches and collapsed corridors, divers glimpse the duality of war. Destruction wrapped in design, menace overtaken by nature's calm. There are tankers, freighters, minesweepers, and destroyers. Some lie split in half, their midsections gaping open like broken spines. Others sit as if merely paused, moored not by anchor, but by history. The San Francisco Maru, sometimes called the $1 million wreck, offers an especially eerie tableau. Tanks line her deck, Type 95 Hagos, rusted yet intact, their guns still pointed skyward. In her cargo hold, mines, shells, and trucks remain where they were loaded over 8 decades ago. Nature has not just reclaimed these hulks, it has adorned them. Branching corals reach like fingers from smokestacks. Sponges bloom in engine compartments. Barracuda hovers silently beneath cranes that once lifted bombs. Break time equals 0. 25s, / schools of jack swirl through gun turrets. In this realm, the machinery of war has been converted into the scaffolding of life. The preservation of these wrecks is a strange alchemy. The lagoon's calm waters, relatively low oxygen levels, and shelter from currents have created a kind of time capsule. Decay exists, but slowly. Where other warships in open ocean have collapsed into rubble, Chuuk's vessels remain eerily whole, as though awaiting orders that will never come. For divers, the experience is surreal. You descend not into darkness, but into a dream woven of iron and reef. Inside engine rooms, gauges still hang on walls. Control panels lie covered in silt, but readable. Shoes, bottles, gas masks, radios, all lie as they fell when the ships died. Personal items, porcelain dishes, leather boots, medicine bottles, float in the soft gloom as intimate echoes of lost lives. And then there are the human remains. Bones, in some places, still rest inside wrecks. In collapsed wheelhouses or trapped engine rooms, skulls peer from shadowed corners. These are not just shipwrecks. They are tombs. War graves lying not in earth, but in water, sacred in their stillness. The ships of Chuuk Lagoon remain there because they cannot be moved. They are too large, too deep, and too heavy with memory. But also because they have become something else, part of the sea, part of the story. They are neither past nor present, but a living memorial suspended between the two. In every beam of rusted steel, every coral-covered gun mount, every stairwell vanishing into sediment, the lagoon asks, what do we leave behind when the guns fall silent? Not only wreckage, but legacy. Not just destruction, but transformation. The giants sleep on, heavy with stories. The sea cradles them gently. And as the years pass, they become more reef than ruin, more memory than metal. The descent begins in silence. A slow drift into sapphire depth, where the sunlight fades to a soft twilight and the surface world slips away. Here, the diver becomes something else, less a visitor, more a pilgrim. With every meter, gravity loosens and time folds inward. This is not just a dive into water. It is a descent into memory. The wrecks of Chuuk Lagoon do not shout their histories. They whisper. Each corridor entered, each hatch opened, reveals a still life paused at the moment of impact. Divers move slowly, carefully, their bubbles spiraling upward like prayers. The flashlight beam swings gently across forgotten control panels, over radios that once barked orders, across maps still pinned to rusting walls. A world suspended, mid-battle, mid-task, mid-life. Many who come to Chuuk are seasoned divers. They know the risks, collapsing hulls, oil pockets, silt outs, entanglement. But they come not just for the thrill. They come for reverence. For connection. To touch, without disturbing, a fragment of the past still resting beneath the tide. Some enter cargo holds thick with fuel drums and artillery shells. Others navigate pilot houses where wheels still rest in place, as if the helmsman just stepped away. In one room of the Yamajiri Maru, a giant engine crankshaft sits exposed, gleaming faintly beneath years of rust and coral. In another ship, the Hoki Maru, trucks lie stacked in the darkness, their tires still round, their frames cloaked in sponge and moss. Inside these submerged vessels, divers experience a profound stillness. The quiet is deeper than silence. It is the weight of the untold. You do not talk here. You listen. The wrecks are not empty. They are inhabited by memory, by tragedy, by the ghosts of those who once served and died aboard them. And sometimes, the divers see them. Break time equals 0. 25s, / not in the way of apparitions or shadows, but in the relics left behind. A teacup placed carefully on a wooden shelf. A pair of sandals by a cot. A hand-drawn calendar, its final date stopped in February 1944. These are not props. They are fragments of lives once lived, ordinary details made sacred by finality. Yet the experience is not only somber. It is also wondrous. For alongside the machinery of war now bloom forests of coral. Sea fans the size of bedsheets sway in slow unison. Lionfish hover like living calligraphy. Wrecks once built for conquest are now sanctuaries. The reef has made peace where nations once made war. Divers often describe surfacing with a strange sense of dislocation. The sunlight feels sharper. The air, too loud. The surface world, too fast. They emerge not just from water, but from another era. And they carry something back, a memory not their own, a story etched in salt and steel. For some, these dives become pilgrimages. Veterans' families have come here. Japanese relatives seeking closure. Historians, filmmakers, poets, all drawn by the silent call of the Ghost Fleet. One diver left behind a string of paper cranes in the wheelhouse of the Kansho Maru. Another placed a small plaque that read simply, "You are not forgotten." And that is perhaps the true power of Chuuk Lagoon. It is not just a dive site. It is a living archive, a submerged museum, a cathedral of salt and rust where the past is not erased but immersed, waiting for those willing to listen with their breath and remember with their eyes. In time, all things return to the earth, even steel, even war. What once fell with fire and fury into the heart of Chuuk Lagoon now lies cradled in coral arms, softened by decades of ocean breath. Nature, the great sculptor of silence, has not merely claimed these ruins, she has transformed them. Beneath the sunlit shimmer of the Pacific, Chuuk has become more than a graveyard. It is a nursery, a sanctuary, a reef of iron bones. The ships, once forged for battle, now bloom like forgotten gardens. Coral encrusts the gun barrels. Sea fans unfold where torpedoes once slept. The jagged scars of war are now pathways for parrotfish and tangs, highways for moray eels and shrimp. Biologists have called Chuuk Lagoon one of the most unexpected artificial reefs on Earth. Over 400 species of coral have taken root on the wrecks. Countless fish dart through portholes and engine rooms. Whale sharks occasionally glide through the deeper waters like ghosts of a more ancient past, drawn to this cradle of life rising from war's detritus. Nature does not mourn as humans do. She reclaims. She rebuilds. What rusts, she coats in algae. What crumbles, she binds with barnacle and sponge. On the bow of the Shinkaku Maru, where sailors once watched the horizon for enemy silhouettes, clownfish now dance in anemones, and feather stars sway like tiny, bioluminescent flags. Some of the most vibrant coral gardens grow not on natural rock, but on twisted gun turrets and collapsed radio towers. In the warhead rooms of sunken destroyers, fluorescent shrimp have made their homes. Even the air pockets trapped in sealed compartments host unique microbial life, tiny, resilient things, thriving in places no sunlight reaches. This is more than ecology. It is resurrection. Not in human terms of right and wrong, victory and defeat, but in the slow, wordless triumph of life. Yet it is not without fragility. The balance that now exists in the lagoon is delicate, like spun glass. The wrecks, though armored in coral, are slowly dissolving. Time and tide gnaw at rivets and hulls. Some ships have already collapsed into silt, their identities lost beneath decades of sediment and storm. Climate change, too, exerts its invisible hand. Rising temperatures bleach corals. Stronger typhoons scour the seafloor. What nature gives, she may one day take again. And so, the Ghost Fleet is living, but dying. Preserved not in permanence, but in process. Still, the resilience of the reef is a quiet marvel. In places where bombs once bloomed underwater, now bloom sea lilies. In holds that once carried tanks, clouds of glassfish now swirl in synchronized pulse. Where sailors once braced for torpedoes, sea turtles now sleep, shells camouflaged against rusting steel. The people of Chuuk have long watched this transformation with reverence. For them, the lagoon is sacred, not only for the bones it holds, but for the rebirth it fosters. Fishermen speak of places where the water glows with fish. Children learn to swim above shipwrecks, their strokes tracing outlines of a war they never knew. Tourists come, cameras in hand, but the locals remind them, this place remembers. You do not take from it. You witness it. You thank it. In the quiet between currents, the ships seem to sigh. Not with pain, but with peace. The sea has rewritten their story. From steel to reef, from death to bloom. And perhaps this is one of the ocean's great teachings. That even in ruin, there can be rebirth. That what we leave behind can become more than memory, it can become life. The ships of Chuuk Lagoon no longer carry war. They carry coral. They carry fish. They carry stories. And they wait. For currents. For light. For the next chapter in the long, slow tide of time. To the outside world, Chuuk Lagoon is a world-class dive site, a submerged museum of rust and coral. But to the people of Chuuk, these waters carry something deeper. The wrecks are not just remnants of war. They are ancestors. Ghosts. Teachers. Guardians of a story that belongs not only to history books, but to the soul of an island people. Long before bombs fell and battleships burned, the people of Chuuk lived in harmony with the lagoon. The sea was not a boundary, but a bridge. Canoes carved from breadfruit trees skimmed over the waves, connecting village to village, island to island. The ocean was their road, their garden, their storyteller. In traditional Chuukese cosmology, the sea is alive. It listens. It remembers. It holds both spirit and shadow. Even the coral has breath. Even the current has intent. So when the great iron beasts of war came and fell into the deep, they did not become lifeless ruins. They became part of the story. Elders speak softly of the wrecks, not with reverence for the empires they once served, but for the spirits that linger. For the men, both Japanese and American, who met their end in the blue silence. For the way the sea embraced them all, friend and foe alike, and wrapped them in its currents. Many Chuukese avoid fishing near the deeper wrecks. Not out of fear, but out of respect. They believe the souls of the fallen linger in the holds, in the stairwells, in the shadows of collapsed hulls. Offerings are sometimes left at shorelines, coconut, betel nut, whispered words, to honor the dead and ensure safe passage through the reef. Oral traditions have absorbed the events of 1944 into island lore. Children grow up not only hearing about Operation Hailstone from textbooks, but from lullabies and canoe chants. Songs that speak of fire falling from the sky, of fish fleeing from heat, of silence returning after the storm. Some families claim dreams where spirits from the wrecks appear. Not with malice, but with longing. As if seeking witness, as if asking to be remembered. In Chuukese belief, forgetting a soul means it becomes lost. Wandering, diminished. So memory is more than nostalgia, it is nourishment for the unseen. Rituals have emerged, blending old practices with the modern shape of grief. Some divers, guided by local elders, offer a stone to the wrecks before entering. Others leave flowers tied in biodegradable cloth, drifting into the hulls like prayers. In recent years, there have even been underwater memorial services, where descendants of Japanese soldiers or Allied pilots weep through their masks in the stillness of the deep. These ceremonies are not about politics. They are not about victory or blame. They are about presence, about meeting history in the flesh, or rather, in the reef. There are elders who believe that the wrecks chose to stay, that they could have been swallowed by the sea completely, buried in sand, or dragged out by storms. But they remain visible, half intact, rusting but whole, as reminders, as sentinels. For the Chuukese, This sacredness extends to care. They monitor the damage caused by careless divers, the scars left by anchors or salvage attempts. There are debates within the community. How do you honor the wrecks? By preserving them in place? By documenting them before they vanish? Or by letting nature take her course? A younger generation of Chuukese is now blending traditional beliefs with science. Marine biologists born on the islands dive the wrecks with both microscope and mantra. They study the coral, chart the species, but they also speak to the ocean. They still whisper before entering a ship's rusted doorway. Still thank the lagoon when they surface. The sacred and the scientific dance in these waters, like two schools of fish circling the same sunken hull. Chuuk Lagoon is not just a dive site. It is a temple, a testament, a teacher of paradox, where steel meets spirit, where history breathes through gills, where remembrance is not carved in stone, but grown in coral. The wrecks do not speak, but the people do. In chants, in silence, in stories passed from canoe to shore. And in that storytelling, the Ghost Fleet lives on. Beneath the sunlit turquoise, the Ghost Fleet of Chuuk slumbers on a slow clock. It is not the ticking of seconds, nor the chime of hours, but the subtle erosion of time carried by salt and silence. The wrecks, once monuments of power, are now falling apart. Not in fire or violence, but in softness, in rust, in surrender. Steel, though strong, is no match for the ocean's patience. Day by day, salt water seeps into joints, splits rivets, and gnaws through armor. Iron dissolves into flake and dust, carried away by invisible currents. A battleship becomes a cradle for sea urchins. A bomber's wing caves into itself. Some wrecks are vanishing faster than others. The Fujikawa Maru, once one of the lagoon's crown jewels, has already lost portions of her upper deck. The Shinkaku Maru, famous for her coral gardens, now groans under her own decaying weight. A handful of ships have already collapsed entirely into the sand, leaving behind only shadows on sonar, outlines traced by divers who remember. Time here does not erase all at once. Break time equals 0. 25s, / it peels memory back layer by layer. A staircase vanishes, then a bulkhead, then a nameplate, until only mystery remains. But the sea's quiet work is not the only force at play. In the last few decades, concern has grown about the environmental threat the wrecks may pose. Many of these ships still contain fuel, bunkered deep in tanks that, for now, remain intact. But when steel breaks, oil spills. In 2001, a scientific survey raised alarms. Over 30,000 metric tons of oil were still estimated to be sealed inside the lagoon's wrecks. If released, it would devastate the fragile coral ecosystems and threaten the livelihoods of Chuukese fishermen. Some call the Ghost Fleet a ticking ecological time bomb. Yet the solution is not simple. To remove the oil, divers would have to disturb ships that are already structurally unstable. Drilling into a 75-year-old wreck is like opening a sealed tomb. It risks collapse, it risks angering spirits, and it risks making the situation worse. And beyond logistics lies a deeper question. Who decides the fate of the wrecks? The Japanese government? The people of Chuuk? UNESCO? Each ship is a historical artifact, a war grave, and a potential pollutant, held in uneasy balance between heritage and hazard. In recent years, marine archaeologists have rushed to document the fleet in its current form before it deteriorates beyond recognition. They bring 3D sonar, photogrammetry, and robotic submersibles to map the interiors with exquisite detail. These digital scans are more than archives. They are ghost captures, allowing future generations to explore what the ocean will soon erase. At the same time, artists and filmmakers are diving with lights and lenses, seeking to capture the surreal beauty of rust and reef. Not to mourn, but to celebrate. To witness a strange form of resurrection where decay itself becomes art. Still, some voices call for action. Oil recovery programs have been proposed. Protective legislation has been debated. But funding is scarce, and the lagoon's remoteness complicates any long-term intervention. For now, the wrecks are left to the slow care of the sea. Coral grows. Crabs scuttle through collapsing corridors. The lagoon continues its quiet inheritance, absorbing war into wilderness, memory into movement. One day, they will be gone. Not removed, not erased, but returned. To salt, to shadow, to sea. The Ghost Fleet does not resist its own vanishing. It sinks not only downward, but inward, deeper into the layers of collective memory, where wreckage becomes myth. And as each beam bends, each propeller softens, each name fades into barnacle crust, Chuuk Lagoon teaches us the final lesson of war's remains. That all empires rust. That the sea forgets nothing, but it also forgives. The surface of Chuuk Lagoon glistens like a sheet of polished glass. Gentle waves break the light into ribbons, dancing across the skin of the sea as if time itself were breathing. Beneath that serenity, however, rests a world undone. A sunken museum of war, silence, and memory. It is here, in this still blue mirror, that history no longer shouts but whispers. The Ghost Fleet is not merely a graveyard of metal. It is a cathedral of contradiction. It holds within it the violence of conquest and the fragility of legacy, the grandeur of machines and the tenderness of reef, the arrogance of war and the humility of time. Tourists come and go. Divers slip into the blue, chasing light through shattered corridors. They move past gas masks half buried in silt, porcelain bowls untouched for decades, shoes lined up like soldiers awaiting orders that will never come. They see machine guns overgrown with coral, airplanes folded into themselves like origami at the bottom of the sea. But not all who visit come to marvel. Some come to mourn. Japanese descendants leave folded paper cranes on rusted rails. Local elders whisper prayers in the native tongue of Chuuk, voices melting into the wind. War veterans, old now and slow, dip their fingers into the water and let the salt cleanse what memory still wounds. Chuuk Lagoon has become a place where history meets humility. The grandeur of empire lies corroded, but not forgotten. And the living, those who dive, who study, who remember, carry forward the burden of translating steel into story. Marine biologists see something different in the wrecks. They see reef blooming on the bones of war. Where once torpedoes lay dormant, schools of fish now swirl in brilliant spirals. The twisted hulks, though fading, serve as artificial reefs, sheltering life, nurturing rebirth. To the sea, war is a brief intrusion. It remembers not generals or dates, but only shapes and minerals. It reclaims not with vengeance, but with silence. The ocean does not judge the hands that built the ships or the ones that sank them. It only receives. And yet, even in this forgetting, there is a quiet kind of remembrance. For as long as the wrecks endure, their presence forces us to look beneath the surface. To see war not as glory or triumph, but as rust and shadow. There is no plaque at the bottom of the lagoon. No monument carved in marble. Only the slow descent of hulls into sand, the soft throb of current against metal, the luminous breath of plankton dancing in the darkness. Here, the past is not frozen. It drifts. It decomposes. It dreams. Chuuk Lagoon is more than a historical site. It is a parable. A living meditation on the futility of dominance, the cost of forgetting, the resilience of nature, and the possibility of peace after ruin. It asks of us, not just to remember, but to reflect. To dive deep, not merely into water, but into time. Into what we were, what we lost, and what we might still become. As the sun sets over the Pacific and the lagoon glows with its final golden hues, the ghosts stir softly in their iron beds. Not to rise, not to haunt, but to remind. That below the surface of every conflict, there lies a deeper current, the yearning to endure, to be remembered, to return to stillness. And so we leave the Ghost Fleet behind, not with fear, not with sorrow, but with reverence. knowing that beneath these waves lies not just the end of war, but the beginning of understanding. For in the quietest places, the truest echoes of history are heard. In the still blue mirror of Chuuk, we see not only the past, but the reflection of our own humanity. Closing narration. Beneath the still waters of the Pacific, time does not sleep, it drifts. In the silent depths of Chuuk Lagoon, the rusted skeletons of war lie cradled in the arms of the sea, suspended between past and present, memory and forgetting. Here, steel has softened into sanctuary. Guns, once raised in fury, are now entwined with coral and cloaked in quiet. Hulls that carried the ambitions of empire now carry fish and silence. We have journeyed through storm and fire, through strategy and sorrow, through lives lived, lost, and left behind. We have walked the decks of the sunken, read the rusted letters of history, and felt the weight of war pressed gently against the ocean floor. But this is more than a story of battles or machines. It is the story of impermanence, of how even the mightiest fleets are no match for salt and time, of how the sea remembers not names or flags, but echoes. Chuuk Lagoon, once a fortress of steel, has become a temple of peace. Its ghost fleet lies not in mourning, but in quiet testimony to the beauty that rises from ruin, to the life that emerges from loss. As we surface from this journey, may we carry with us more than history. May we carry reverence, a deeper understanding of the fragile balance between destruction and renewal, between the noise of war and the silence of its aftermath. For the ocean holds not just what we've buried, but who we've been and who we might still become. Let us listen. Let us remember. And let the ghost fleet of Chuuk, asleep in its watery cathedral, remind us always that beneath even the darkest wreckage, something luminous can grow. The past lies beneath the waves, but its whispers rise with the tide. And in listening, we return, again and again, to the quiet, endless story of the sea.